Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa, and for the project manager interview, I chose to interview my sister's boss, actually, whose name is Jennifer Schroeder. Jennifer grew up in Detroit and attended Eastern Michigan State College, where she majored in communication sciences and disorders. After she completed her bachelor's degree, Jennifer decided to pursue a master's in special education for speech language pathology. So she was going to go into education. She was a few classes shy of completing the degree before she had to move for her husband's job. And unfortunately, she never went back to finish the degree because her and her husband ended up opening um, a few different companies along the way. Prior to her current role, Jennifer worked in the education field and she worked as a bookkeeper for various different companies, including her husband's companies. And then Jennifer and her family moved to North Carolina in 2005. Her husband started an advertising agency called Encompass in 2006, where Jennifer worked as the HR manager and bookkeeper for 11 years. So currently, she is a project manager at this Encompass advertising agency, and she's been in this role for a total of 3 years. Her change in positions to project manager came about by accident because they needed somebody to fill the spot temporarily. So she just stepped in thinking that she was just going to be there for a short period of time. But she ended up loving it and decided to stick with the role. So they didn't hire anybody else for it. And her initial education, even though it was in education itself, um, she she didn't really feel completely prepared for this role. So she considered taking some additional college courses at one point. But as she kind of got a little bit more experience in the role, she realized that she actually did have a lot of the skills that were necessary to complete the job. And she ended up not pursuing any courses or certifications because she had two kids in college at the same time and she just couldn't see how it would work financially. Um, she did say she would still like to take some courses at one point in time, but she doesn't think she's going to pursue an actual degree in the field. So Encompass itself is a small digital advertising agency that's comprised of about 12 employees. So it's a very small company. And they take on a variety of projects that range from creating signage to creating entire company websites and commercials. And they've been placed on the INC 5000 list of fastest growing private companies in the United States. And they were also named one of INC's top workplaces due to the culture, employee engagement, and excellent benefits that they offer. And Jennifer and her husband have owned this company for a total of 14 years. So the interview itself was conducted through Zoom, and Jennifer was provided the list of questions in advance so that she would have some time to formulate and think about her answers before our conversation. And this kind of helped make the interview a little more productive for me because she didn't have to stop and think about her answers first. And I think it also helped me get the most information out of the questions that she was provided. This also helped me ask more follow-up questions, and we could kind of focus more on those. So I recorded the interview on Zoom so that I could review it in case I missed anything, during the interview itself. And I took notes during the interview as I could, and then, went back and fortified those notes through watching the recording again. So when I spoke with Jennifer, she mentioned that there were two major project management challenges that seemed to affect her the most. So the first challenge she mentioned was meeting timeline expectations. And she said that this is especially difficult for the longer term projects because it can be easy to put those projects on the back burner when projects that have shorter turnaround times come in. And Jennifer tries to address these issues by helping her team learn how to prioritize their tasks. So she actually works backwards to determine the best timeline for each project. So she'll start with the end goal and then, work her way back to the beginning of the project to figure out what the best timeline would be. So she thoroughly thinks through and documents all of the steps that are required to complete each task within a project. And then she uses that information to determine the most effective timing for each step. And she mentioned that no matter how thoroughly she goes through the steps required to complete her tasks ahead of time, adjustments to the process are always necessary when they start working on the project. So she tries really hard to keep the project on track by continuously evaluating the process throughout the project rather than waiting to address issues at the end. So this was actually one of the major issues that they had as a company prior to Jennifer starting in the project management role. So they had a lot of dysfunction within the team, getting projects done on time. So Jennifer has been working really hard for the past 3 years to focus on this specific challenge and make sure that her and her team are able to deliver a great product in a realistic amount of time for her clients. So Jennifer also mentioned that sometimes her clients might unexpectedly ask for the project timeline to be pushed up. So this ends up shortening the amount of time that her team has to complete the project. And this is especially challenging for her because the initial steps that Jennifer took to create a plan for her team to follow to get the project completed on time essentially has to be reworked so that they can complete the project faster. And this can present a problem for other project timelines too, because when you're not expecting a project to have to be completed quick, in a shorter period of time, now you kind of have to put all of your focus on that one project and kind of put some of the other ones to the side, and make sure that you get this project done. So Jennifer said that she addresses this challenge by trying to make sure that each project she creates a timeline for has a little extra time built in, which allows for emergencies or extra tasks that need to get squeezed in. So technically, she's telling the client a date that might actually end up being, it's like a realistic date for her, just in case issues arise, but she may end up getting the project completed faster. So this kind of helps her if she does end up having to complete the project faster, because she does have those extra days budgeted in. And if they don't need those extra days, then it's easy for them to finish it a little faster. So she really tries to be realistic with the initial time quote that she gives her clients. And she said that it's better to surprise them with faster completion times than it is to have a difficult conversation about a missed deadline, which I can completely understand. I think that's a really smart way to, run your business. So the ability to get the job done quickly really all comes down to the team that she has. She says that a team that works really well together helps prevent unnecessary mistakes, and time wasted that you would spend reviewing incorrect work if your team members don't, work well together. The second major challenge that Jennifer mentioned was keeping projects on pace when unanticipated technical issues arise. So since they're a digital advertising firm, a lot of what they do relies on servers working correctly, and it relies on like website hosts and that sort of thing. So these technical issues are always something to do with those types of things, so things with the websites themselves. And her team members have to figure out how to fit addressing these issues into the project queue at the same time that they're trying to manage like the individual pieces of the project timeline, and the whole project timeline itself. So Jennifer says that she's able to manage this problem the same way that she handles clients asking for a faster turn time. It all comes down to making sure that you're adding in additional days just in case some sort of issue arises, and then giving your client a realistic timeline, including those days, so that you have time in case an issue comes up. So she keeps a list of the technical issues that they run into as they happen during the project. She says sometimes it's hard to address every little thing that happens during a project while you're actually in the heat of the project, but they do come back to those technical issues and address it together as a team after the project has been completed in an effort to try and prevent those types of issues from happening again in the future if they are preventable. Sometimes technical issues aren't necessarily preventable, but if it's something that they can fix for the future, then they definitely do that. The last major challenge that Jennifer did talk about was dealing with scope creep. And she thinks that this is one of the hardest challenges to address because every project is different and it can be difficult to see all of the potential issues ahead of time. Jennifer says that the best way she's found to manage scope creep actually begins before the project even starts. So her and her team members sit down together after the account team members have some time to come up with an outline with Jennifer on the anticipated project scope. And this initial outline and the further documentation of the project scope will vary depending on the size of the project, but they always start with some sort of outline so that team members understand their role in the project from the very beginning, and it kind of helps set the stage for how the project is going to flow. So they always work together to identify and discuss potential risks associated with the project that could affect its completion. And then they try to come up with effective ways to mitigate the chances for those risks of happening. And after they talk about that with a team, Jennifer will then come up with a detailed checklist of the steps that each person on the project team is required to complete to keep the project on schedule. So they get this checklist with basically like due dates for each little task that needs to be completed throughout the project. So this checklist also includes the risks that they've identified as a team so that all members know when these risks could potentially arise throughout the project so that they can kind of keep an eye out on them to make sure that they don't turn into issues. And as her and her team work on each project, they do keep detailed notes on a document. It's called a website briefing document that Jennifer creates for each project. And this document describes all of the content that goes into completing each project, and it has separate tabs for each task that's involved to complete the project. So team members are expected to update this document daily with any special notes or changes that are required to keep all of the team members up to date on where each piece of the project is at throughout production. And Jennifer also keeps an outline of the dates of each part of the project that need to be completed and the dates that they are completed, so that she can keep up with making sure that the project is continuing to stick to her initial schedule. So her and her team members will meet often to discuss how they can rearrange or add steps to the process to be more efficient and help minimize the chances of scope creep occurring throughout the process. So even though she works hard to ensure that scope creep doesn't get out of control on all of her projects, she did say that it was difficult to avoid this every time. So anytime scope creep occurs on a project with her and her team, they will all sit down together to discuss ways they can improve on their process in the future so they can mitigate any potential issues and minimize the chances of scope creep happening in the future. And she mentioned that missing potential issues or risks at the beginning of a project and making mistakes can be very frustrating to her, but she tries to use these mistakes as learning experiences to help her team grow and to learn to make their next project even better. So she has a really positive outlook on the entire project management experience, where she's recognized that instead of stressing about everything, it's better to, document what you can, address everything at the completion of a project if it can't be addressed during the actual project. And then just, using every mistake as a learning experience. And that's really what she said helps her team grow and perform the best. So when I asked Jennifer about any advice that she might have for new project managers, she had a ton of information to share with me. She said that when she initially took on this position, her entire company's process needed an overhaul, which I mentioned earlier. And she said that was very overwhelming to her because everything was dysfunctional. So she initially thought that she could easily determine all of the issues that were happening with her team and come up with solutions to improve everything within the first year. But she realized really quickly that it was a lot more challenging to try to initiate a bunch of changes in their process while also working on a bunch of projects at the same time, all within the first year that she was doing this job. So it took her about 2 years to resolve their big issues, but she's still working through addressing some of the smaller issues now 3 years into her role. So it's taken her a really long time to address and fix a lot of the problems that Encompass was having. So her biggest piece of advice when entering the project management field was to be patient. So I know most people identify changes that they want to make when they first entered their role, whatever role it is, whatever position you join, especially as a manager. You find a bunch of things that you want to fix, and you want to fix all of those things right away. So she said it's really difficult to find the best way to address those issues while you're trying to manage several projects at one time. So she said the best way to try and initiate and implement changes is to keep a running list of everything that you notice as you notice them. So all of the problems that you see, and then only focus on 1 or 2 things at a time until they truly improve. That way you're not kind of, giving a much smaller effort. You're able to give each issue its full attention and find a solution that really works for you and your team. She also said it's important to just keep plugging away at the list until you've addressed everything, although you probably won't address everything because the second you fix one thing, you notice something else that needs to be fixed. Jennifer also said that part of being a good project manager is to be a good leader and to lead by example. And she does this by listening to what her team members have to say and making sure that they're heard by addressing any issues that they bring up. So she feels it's important to empower each person on her team to do their best work and to be proud of what they do. And that helps actually promote buy-in and make them feel like they have a role in the quality of the work that they're producing. Jennifer thinks it's really important to have a solid process for finding new employees and hiring ones that are a good fit for the culture of your company. She said this is key to having an effective team that works well together. In the time she's been a project manager, she said she's never had to deal with team members that aren't working to their full potential due to their extensive interviewing and hiring process. With that being said, she has hired a couple of employees that just didn't have the skills and abilities to do their job effectively. And in those instances, she tries to give them opportunities to improve on those skills, but then essentially lets the employee take the matter into their own hands. So either they'll use those suggestions and improve their skills, or they don't. So if they can improve upon their skills successfully, it's basically a win-win for both of them. But if they aren't able to improve on their skills, she does move them either to a position that's more suited for them if they have one available, or unfortunately, she lets them go. So she says that she's found having the right people in the right seats is a critical element to a growing and thriving company, especially a small company like hers. And then her biggest piece of advice to me was to prepare myself for future project management was to read 2 books. So the 2 books that she mentioned were Traction and Entrepreneurial's Operating System, and Get a Grip, how to get everything you wanted from your entrepreneurial business. So she had her entire company read both books, and then she implemented a project management system that took key points from each book within her own company. And this is what she's basically been doing over the past 3 years to overhaul Encompass's project management issues. So the key points that she successfully implemented from these books were documenting processes. So documenting everything, figuring out the necessary steps in order of each major task that her department completes, and then communicating often with her employees through structured weekly department meetings. So communication is key. She also keeps a scorecard of her department's most important metrics. So this includes things like keeping track of missed deadlines, keeping track of mistakes that were made, so that they can be addressed during the weekly meetings together as a group to help them determine any process changes that need to be made to ensure that those mistakes don't happen again. And one of the biggest lessons Jennifer said she's learned as a project manager is that improving a company's process is continuous. So the initial thought she had of coming into Encompass and changing everything within the first year were just completely unrealistic. So even though now she's realized that, and she's cleaned up a lot of the initial issues that she recognized, when she first started in this role, new issues have arisen since then. Technology is always changing. The needs of the company are changing. So she thinks that really part of the role of a project manager is to just be continuously looking for ways to improve. She also said, though, that this is one of the best parts of the job because it's always fun to make improvements and watch your company grow as a result. After reflecting on my interview with Jennifer, there were a few things that I learned about project management that really resonated with me. First, it's clear that being a good project manager doesn't just mean you manage the project well. So being a project manager entails so much more than keeping the project on task. It includes having good people skills, being a good listener, as well as a good communicator, having entrepreneurial skills, like being able to find processes and systems that can be applied to any project, and being enthusiastic about each project to help encourage employee buy-in and ownership of their work. It's about keeping morale up when everyone else is feeling stressed and not showing your stress yourself, as well as helping your team members when issues arise rather than accusing them of doing something wrong. It's a job that requires you to constantly think ahead to mitigate future issues, and your job is never truly done. There's always changes to be made to make your team more effective. I've also learned that it's important to be patient if you want to minimize stress in this role. And this little tidbit was actually really important for me to hear because I'm somebody that likes to attack every issue as it's happening all at the same time rather than focusing on one thing at a time. So Jennifer's advice to pick a few issues at a time to focus on, and then making a list of all of the other issues that can wait to be addressed later, and then keeping up with that list a little bit at a time was really good advice for me. I'm definitely a very high stress person. So finding a way to address problems a little bit at a time will definitely help reduce my stress and help ensure that the improvements that are made are actually quality improvements and not just quick fixes. I also learned that the people you choose as your team members will ultimately determine how effectively you're able to communicate and work together as a team. So it's important to make sure that you pick the right people for each position. As much as I hate to say this, I understand that it's also okay if you hire someone that isn't the right fit for the position. It's your responsibility to do something about it, though, and learn from those experiences. And it's also important to own up to your mistakes and use them as learning experiences for the whole team so that everybody can grow. Based on this interview with Jennifer, project management sounds like it can be a very overwhelming job, but if you learn to manage yourself and your own stress as well as your team effectively, it can be very rewarding.